Hi there. It's not easy to plan for a disaster. Just thinking about it can be hard. It can be even harder if you're a caregiver or if you have a disability yourself. But planning for a disaster does not have to be difficult. In fact, doing it may help you feel better. It can reduce the stress you may feel when you think about a disaster. So we're here to give you some advice about how to develop a plan. We'll be giving you some general information that could apply to any emergency situation like a power outage. But a lot of our advice will deal with how to plan for a hurricane, which we're all becoming very familiar with here in Florida. One of the first things you need to think about with a hurricane is whether you can stay in your home or whether you should evacuate. First, are you in a zone at risk of storm surge or flooding? We have Jessica here to tell us about that.
Thank you so much for having me today. Absolutely. The first thing we encourage you to do when preparing for hurricane season is to know and understand your risk. And that's risk from flood, winds, and storm surge. Evacuation zones are built on storm surge models, so that is the key point to know if you're in an evacuation zone, so you know when an order is called if you need to leave your house.
And how can someone know what zone they're in?
That's a great question. There are several ways to look up your evacuation zone. Disaster.pinellas.org. You can call from a landline at 727-453-3150, or you can go on the property appraiser's website and the information is there. It is also on utility bills for some Pinellas County residents.
And for someone who doesn't live in Pinellas County, how could they find out?
I would recommend calling your emergency management department or visiting your county website page.
And if you find out that you are not in a zone that is likely to evacuate in a hurricane, say you're in I know that the higher letter zones, they are considered to be less at risk for flooding. But if you know your neighborhood floods, even when you get a heavy rain, what would you recommend for someone like that?
So absolutely. So if you're not in an evacuation zone or you're not in an evacuation zone that's called to evacuate, you may want to consider sheltering in place, but consider the structure that you're in, and also, like you said, if your neighborhood floods, and if so, then you'd want to come up with a plan to get to a shelter or friend or family's home.
Jessica, what would you advise about how to determine whether your home is sturdy enough, say if there are going to be high winds with a hurricane?
Well, you definitely want to make sure that the structure is secure, you're able to brace your garage doors, and there's definitely ways to mitigate and harden your home before the storm comes. And we'll dive into that a little bit more coming up.
Yes, thank you very much. One thing that's important to remember is that you don't have to do this alone. There are people who can advise you and help you.
Once you've made your plan, you will need to build an emergency kit, and your plan will dictate what items go in your emergency kit. Are you going to be sheltering at home? Are you going to be going to a public shelter? But everybody needs to have the basic supplies. Water, 1 gallon per person per day for drinking, 1 gallon per person per day for hygiene and cooking. And that is for 7 days. Also, non-perishable foods, and think about not having power, so putting in a non-electric can opener will be a lifesaver. Think about hygiene, Clorox wipes, hand sanitizer, having wipes and disinfectant for cleaning, sunscreen, rain gear for severe weather, also having a lantern or flashlight, so if you lose power, you have the ability to see in your home. Also, safety, first aid kit, over-the-counter medications, and also your prescription medications. You're able to get an additional 30-day supply of prescription medications once a disaster is declared, and you are able to get a printout from your doctor, so you have all that information you can pack with you. Also think about toiletries, shampoo, conditioner, toothpaste, toothbrush, Band-Aids, additional batteries, a notebook, so you have all your contact information, insurance information. That way, if you don't have access to the internet, or this is where you keep your information, it's right at your fingertips. Don't forget games, some fun Sudoku, so you can keep busy until the storm passes. And also important documents. birth certificates, driver's license, cash, insurance documents. Think about documents that are not easily replaced and make sure those are secured in a Ziploc waterproof bag and put in a waterproof bin so you can either pop that in the car and head to your safe place or shelter at home. And a very important key to any kit is a NOAA weather radio or hand crank radio. That way you can get access to emergency alerts and emergency information once we lose power. The chances are we're gonna be without power, so thinking about things that you'll need to be self-sustainable for 14 days, and that includes you and everybody that is sheltering with you. Additional items to consider would be large garbage bags, extra batteries, battery-powered fan, a battery backup for your phone charger, a camera to document any damage. Also consider personal needs. If you wear a hearing aid, packing some extra batteries for your device, and any medical equipment that you would need to be self-sustainable for 14 days. Once the severe weather has passed and it's safe to go outdoors, you may find it useful to have a tarp with some elastic ropes to mitigate any damage that your home has sustained. If there is a boil water notice after the storm, or you're unsure if your water is safe to drink, if you don't have access to boil the water, you can use household bleach to disinfect the water to make it safe for drinking. You will use 8 drops of bleach per 1 gallon of water. You're encouraged to take advantage of your county's resources. Many counties offer a hurricane preparedness guide with all the hurricane preparedness tips and information about building kits, shelters, and evacuations. Now let's hear from Jody about normalcy during sheltering in place.
I'm here with Jody of the Alzheimer's Association, who's going to talk to us about some things to take into consideration if you're a caregiver of someone with dementia. Welcome, Jody.
Thank you so much for including us in this. So in order to create a sense of normalcy, we want you to try to really think ahead. Don't wait to the last minute to try to pack for the storm or to try to create your go bag or your emergency preparedness box for the storm. Take advantage, if you're living with someone with Alzheimer's and dementia, you're a caregiver for someone with Alzheimer's and dementia, maybe take that time to pack ahead for like when they're sleeping, when they're taking a nap, so it doesn't create so much anxiety within the person living with the disease.
And so imagine that the storm is occurring, you are with the person that you care for. What are some things that you can do ahead of time and maybe even during the storm to try to keep a sense of calm and normalcy?
So remember their schedule. Really, truly try to maintain the schedule that they're on. So if they take a nap at a certain time during the day, try to keep that nap time. If they like snacks at a certain time of day, try to keep that snack handy. So say they like a half of a peanut butter sandwich. Go ahead and make 6 half a peanut butter sandwich and pack them up so that you can give them to them. Reassure them that everything's going to be okay and that they're safe.
And so what about any kind of activities that you think would be a good thing to have around?
So activities are great. So if you have puzzle books and they like puzzles, if you have crosswords, go ahead and pack that crossword book. Keep some art supplies on hand. The person living with Alzheimer's or dementia may really enjoy being creative. They also may want to help participate in things that are going on. So if you're turning flashlights on, give them tasks, give them jobs to do.
And if the power goes out and everything goes dark, what kinds of things do you recommend to try to help someone feel less anxious?
So in order to make someone feel less anxious, it's really important to tell them that they're safe and that you're with them. Hold their hand, keep reassuring them that everything's going to be okay. And make sure you have flashlights in places that they're handy. You don't want to be running across the room to get a flashlight and leaving your person with the disease sitting in the dark.
Mm-hmm. Jody, what do you recommend if someone needs to evacuate and they're with someone with dementia, what are some things that they can do to help minimize the anxiety of that experience?
So if their person living with Alzheimer's or dementia has a specific comfort item, a blanket, maybe it's a stuffed animal, maybe it's even just a favorite shirt, make sure that they have that item. It's so important to create that normalcy and have that special comfort item for them.
And what about going to a shelter? What sorts of things would you advise about that?
Well, make sure it's still safe to go to the shelter, and also make sure that your name is on the list and everything is updated for a special needs shelter so that they know you would be coming. And there's actually 2 more things I'd like to bring up. So the Alzheimer's Association has an 800 helpline number. So that number is 1-800-272-3900, and any caregiver can call that number to get information. But we also have companion cards that are perfect in the event that someone has to go to a special needs shelter. In essence, these companion cards give the ability to give information about someone that's living with Alzheimer's and dementia. And it also says to please be kind and patient with them.
That is very helpful. Thank you, Jody. Whatever you decide to include in your disaster plan, it's very important that you share your plan with others before the disaster occurs. It could be a family member or friends, even a service provider. Someone needs to know where to find you after the event and how to reach you. Have more than one contact and plan to be in touch with them as soon as you can after the event. Consider choosing a time and place to meet when it's safe. Another thing about communication, regardless of how well you plan for an emergency, it can be difficult if you're a caregiver for someone who has a hard time remembering things or someone who's likely to get anxious and upset in a difficult situation. Jody, what advice do you have for caregivers who are responsible for someone else in an emergency?
So communication is really key, and remembering that communication is both verbal and nonverbal. So when we talk to somebody who has Alzheimer's or dementia, we want to talk in a very calm, reassuring voice, letting them know that they're safe and okay. But we also want to look at their nonverbals. It may be something as much as they could be sitting on their hands, they could be wringing their hands, they could be maybe twitching or moving in their chair a lot. And knowing their nonverbals for communication helps you with your verbal communication. And it also helps with your nonverbal communication as well, because you can put your hand on their arm to make sure that they know that they're safe, and you're reassuring them both verbally and non-verbally.
And what about the caregiver and how they should behave in these situations?
So the caregiver really needs to be mindful of their actions. Keep their anxiety levels under control, because when you show anxiety around someone that has Alzheimer's and dementia, they can pick up your anxiety as well. So again, calming, reassuring.
And how about tone of voice? What do you think about that?
So tone of voice is really, really key. With tone of voice, you want to really keep things on a very level note. Women often have a tendency to have a rise in their voice when we get a little bit nervous or stressed. So we will often say, if you can feel it, you might want to take your chin and lower it to your chest, because that will actually lower your voice 1 octave and make sure that you kind of keep that level tone.
Thank you. This is very helpful.
You're very welcome.
Getting through a disaster like a hurricane takes planning and preparation, but you don't have to do it all at once. You can do it in steps over time, and you don't have to do it alone. But the most important thing to know is that having a plan will make it easier. If you're a caregiver, it could greatly ease your stress. Here are some resources to help you. One of the first things you need to do when you're making a disaster plan is to decide whether you should shelter in place or whether you should evacuate. Jessica, what advice do you have for how to decide whether to evacuate?
If a caregiver or the person they're caring for lives in a mobile home park, they are always required to evacuate during an evacuation order. Also, if you live in an evacuation zone, that is called to evacuate. It is not safe to stay and shelter in place.
Why is that?
Again, evacuation zones are based on storm surge models. That means that storm surge is expected to affect that area and affect your property, and it's not safe to stay in your home.
If someone needs to go to a shelter, what is your advice about how they can decide where to go?
Well, there's several evacuation options in Pinellas, and I definitely recommend researching what evacuation options are available in the county that you live in. For Pinellas, for example, you can evacuate to a host home, which is the recommended option for evacuation. It's a safe place, the home of a friend or family member, somebody from your faith-based organization or another organization that you're involved in. It's going to be the most comfortable to ride out the storm, and especially if you're dealing with somebody in a high anxiety situation, it will really bring that comfort level. If you don't have access to that resource, you can look at going to an Airbnb or a motel or a hotel, and there are resources through your county website to find out what options are available during evacuations. If you don't have access to any of that, please do not stay. We recommend that you go to a shelter to stay safe. We always say it is the last resort. It is a lifeboat, not a cruise ship, but we do want you to evacuate to a shelter to stay safe.
Jessica, what other things do you think people need to know about going to a shelter?
Well, we have 3 different types of shelters here in Pinellas, so determining what your needs are will really help you determine what type of shelter is going to be best suited for you. Here in Pinellas, we have 3 options. We have a general population shelter, animal-friendly shelter, and a special needs shelter.
And what if you have a pet? What can you do, and what do you need to know about going to a shelter with your pet, if that's even possible?
So that would be our animal-friendly shelter options, and just like we discussed earlier with preparing your kit, your pet also has a Pet Go kit, and those items need to be remembered when you're making that disaster plan.
What should you include in a Pet Go kit?
That's a great question. So you want the animal to be comfortable, just like we want to be comfortable when we're evacuating. So food, leash, bowls, also treats, their special toy or blanket, anything that will make them feel comfortable. But most importantly, having a copy of their county license, immunization records, and their microchip information updated is the most important thing.
And Lou, what kind of advice do you have for people who have special needs or maybe caring for someone with special needs?
Sure. So it's important that anyone who has any needs, such as ambulating, walking, self-care, that are electrically dependent on oxygen or other medical equipment, that they register for the special needs by accessing the registry. And that's found on our County Emergency Management website, or you can call our office for a paper form and we will mail that out to them to complete. It's important that individuals and caretakers know about this program, because in time of an evacuation that they can go to a special needs shelter, which has additional care through Department of Health nurses and the ability to operate the electrical dependent equipment at the special needs shelter. Certainly caregivers would accompany them to the special needs shelters as well to assist them in a lot of the daily care that they do every day while they're in the shelters. The caregivers can also include their name on the special needs registration form as well, because they will assist in caring for the individual while they're at the special needs shelter. It's also important in preparation to go to a special needs shelter is that all of your medications are with you. If you're on oxygen, that oxygen must come with you as well. And if you have medication that requires refrigeration, that falls into the special needs category for special needs sheltering.
And if you don't live in Pinellas County, does every county have at least one special needs shelter? And how might someone find out about that if they're in a different part of Florida?
Sure. So it's important that they reach out to their emergency management office where they reside, or the county emergency management office to find out that information.
And every county in Florida has an emergency management office?
Yes.
Lou, what do you advise about transportation to a shelter and registering for a shelter?
Sure. Transportation to a shelter can be completed in two ways. One, the individual themselves or a family or a friend can transport the special needs individual to a shelter during the evacuation order. Or if the individual is unable to transport themselves or doesn't have the ability for transportation, they can register in advance in the special needs registry, and then scheduled transportation would occur to pick them up at their residence and take them to the special needs shelter.
And who do they contact to get on this special needs registry in order to have transportation?
It can be done in a few ways. One, the individual can log on to our county website, the emergency management website, and they can register electronically. Or they can call our office and request a paper form to be mailed. Once they complete the form, they can mail it back into us, and we will ensure that it is entered into the system. If an individual is not registered and there is a storm that is approaching, they can contact our County Information Center or CIC, and that number will be posted in advance, and they can speak to a live operator who will then register them into the system.
And so when a storm is coming and someone hasn't registered, there are still ways that they could go to the special needs shelter?
Yes.
Okay. And is it possible to know beforehand what shelter you might go to if you have special needs?
There is. We ask everyone to identify what shelters are in close proximity to where they reside. However, every storm and every emergency is different, so every shelter might not be open. So it's good to follow the direction of the emergency management officials during that emergency, and they will identify the direction and the shelters that are open in advance.
Thank you very much. And we have some information for you now about how to find out where the shelters are and who to call when an emergency happens.